Welcome to another episode of Escapes from the Novus Ordo. I'm your host, Stephen Heiner, and with me today is James Marshall. Hello, James.
Hello, Stephen.
Uh, it was funny after the last episode came out with Father Phillipson, people said, "Oh, how many episodes are going to be in the series?" And I laugh to think, do people think that Novus Ordo priests leave every day and then become traditional priests? It's not a very frequent occurrence, is it?
I don't think so.
I think so. People were very encouraged. I think we had posted on social media pictures of your tonsure, and they wanted to know your story, and I wanted to know your story too because we haven't had a chance to chat. But in recent days, you forwarded me the letters that you wrote and the correspondence that you have with your provincial, and I also had a chance to chat with you about um, a bit about your journey. There's really so much, and as I said with Father Phillipson, maybe we'll do a director's cut sometime. But today, I just want to go through some of the broad outlines.
Okay.
And so, why don't we start with where you were born and siblings and your exposure to the Catholic faith?
I was born in El Paso, Texas. Um, I have a sister, and I have some half brothers and sisters. And I was Catholic. I grew up Catholic, baptized. In fact, baptized in the old rite. And but by the time it came to religious education, being that I went to public school, my parents sent me to the church CCD, and it was by that point, pretty much everything was Novus Ordo, and so my religious education was in very little.
I think you were saying one of the times you were making ornaments. This was the extent of your CCD formation.
Yeah, I made a great ornament in third grade for the Christmas tree. Yes.
So somehow you make it through this, CCD ornament making and lack of proper formation. And where did you end up going to school? What did you want to study?
Um, I was all public school through high school, of course, and then my university, I went to New Mexico State. It took me a while to discern or to figure out uh, what I was supposed to be, what I was going to major in, but eventually I majored in something called business computer systems. And um, I really I don't really think I ever had a real aptitude for it, but I had to choose something. And so and it seemed like the field that was kind of the big, growing field at the time, and I'd be able to make some money doing it. And so there was a certain way in which it made sense to do that.
So as far as career went, you thought this might be good, but you would say in a larger sense, you didn't feel like there was a direction in your life.
Yes, because then when I finally got my job and I was working, I had a sense in my job that I wasn't moving forward. The wheels were spinning in the ice. I remember at the time my grandfather passed away, and one of my mother's cousins, who was a Jesuit priest, he took very good care of our family during that time up in Chicago. And it made me think about life and death. That's really has much to do with our choice of vocation. It's what's going to happen to us after we die.
Very, very famously, Saint Francis Borgia, right? He saw a dead body and he made a decision right then.
Right.
But this wasn't the same for you. You didn't have this tragedy happen and then say, you know what, I need to become a priest. But there was, let's say, a beginning of a movement in that direction.
I would say so, because then I began to think I need to change something in my life. So I went for some graduate studies at Texas A&M University. And very soon in my graduate studies, I was thinking about priestly things, and the priests at the student center, they were inspiring to me. Diocesan and a Jesuit priest.
And of course, the Jesuit priest is where your story takes
Correct.
off because you didn't pursue a diocesan vocation. You pursued something with the Jesuits, in part inspired by the example that you had there at the
Correct.
student center.
Correct.
So, for those who don't know, Jesuit formation is a long one.
Correct.
It's not 6 or 7 years as for a secular priest. It can be 11, 12 years. And why is this? Let's just speak broadly. So for people who may not be familiar with the Jesuits.
Well, there's a 2-year novitiate for one thing. So many religious orders have a 1-year novitiate, And then also there's a period in the middle of Jesuit formation called Regency. And Regency is kind of the work phase. And so very often the men will go to a high school for 2-3 years. And so that adds to our formation. And
That's a
then
break in your studies?
that's the break in the studies. So we have our 2-year novitiate, and then 3 years of first studies, they call it, and then 3 years of theology studies at the end. And then, so
And where were you for your Regency?
I was for my Regency at Jesuit College Prep in Dallas, Texas.
Okay. Not too. It's funny. Jesuit is next to Saint Rita,
Correct?
and that was the very first Novus Ordo church our family went to when we moved to America.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I know
Okay.
about Jesuit. I don't know if we were there at the same time, but it would be interesting to compare dates at some point and find out. So for your Regency, you're there, but there starts to be this narrative of we're not quite sure about James, I think.
Yes. I think pretty much after my ordination, my superiors began to have questions if, am I going in a right direction? There was a particular priest that I got to be good friends with, a Jesuit priest, that I wanted him to be my spiritual director, and my provincial didn't want him to be my spiritual director.
Because
I don't know if they thought he was too far out there. He was very much a pro-life priest. He was charismatic priest. I don't know what the reason was, but I
now
think
you told me pro-life was a problem, which was an interesting thing to me. It's one of the things I grew up in the Novus Ordo that I could always count on. Everyone was pro-life. You'd go, pro-life marches, pray in front of abortion clinics. Like this was pretty standard fare in the Novus Ordo. But you said you brought it up sometime, and a few women were quite unhappy that you had brought it up.
yes, in my studies, where I studied in Berkeley, I remember in one class, they were telling us about all the different social issues. And on this long list of social issues, abortion wasn't in there. Pro-life wasn't in there. And so I remember raising my hand and saying, why wasn't it in there? This was maybe the most important pro-life issue, and the most important social justice issue. And I remember a couple of the women in my group became very angry. And I remember just the general atmosphere in my theology studies was pretty anti pro-life, pretty much every other social justice, but not pro-life.
So it's interesting that the part of your journey starts to go through the pro-life movement, and even there, we're not talking about Latin Mass. We're not talking about anything else. That you can start to see some resistance, not only from these fellow students, but even from your superiors. Didn't want you to be friends with this person who was very prominently a pro-life priest.
Right.
And so that leads to some transfers here and there. And as you continue on in this journey, at some point you end up in Florida, correct?
Yeah, Florida was really the last place before I was dismissed from the Society of Jesus.
Okay, so let me back up. Before Florida, we're in New Orleans and San Antonio, right?
Right.
And San Antonio is where the Latin Mass journey begins.
Correct.
Okay, so I should pick up there that we're worried about James, we're worried about his vocation. Part of that is potentially you're asking too many questions. And another one which really shocked me, you were accused of praying too much.
Yes, that was when they transferred me out of El Paso to Houston, and my superior told me the real reason for my moving from El Paso, why they moved me, was because I had become too rigid. I was praying too much. That's what,
Hear that word. It's too rigid.
yes.
Rigid people pray a lot, and praying is a problem apparently for Catholics.
I don't know. It makes you not be so docile, I guess.
So it would seem to be the opposite, that prayer would make you more docile, but your too much prayer made you not docile to their agenda.
Correct.
So in your non-docility in San Antonio, and this would be around 2010, 2009, 2011, around that
Something like
time.
that.
You were in San Antonio for 5 years, that some parishioners asked you to say the Latin Mass, or said, hey, maybe you should take a look at the Latin Mass?
Yes, they were starting to suggest it. And so I knew a priest.
And this was something you thought about before, right? This wasn't a new idea to you.
From the very beginning. I hadn't even ever seen the Latin Mass. But there was something about the Novus Ordo which seemed to be missing it seemed to be missing something, and I always felt like I had to add to it.
Okay.
So I would whip out my trumpet and I'd play a tune for my preaching, and people loved it.
Really?
People loved it, and they would say, "Father Marshall, great homily." And I thought, wow. But then I began to think, did they hear any of the content, or did they just think great trumpet playing?
I've never heard of or seen
Yeah,
that, but
yeah,
there you are trying to make something more of the mass somehow
right,
that it was lacking.
right.
So they tell you celebrate the Latin mass, and how do you go about doing that?
So there was a priest in San Antonio that said he would come and help me learn it, so he did. And then at one point, the archbishop, he asked for somebody in the archdiocese if they could celebrate the Latin mass at this parish once a
And
month.
you said,
And I raised my hand and said yes. And so my superior let me do it.
so you may be allowed to say the Latin mass, but you have to be careful about what you preach about, apparently. I think that at one point you gave a sermon that's a shocking idea. Homosexual marriage is wrong.
Yes, I said that, and it received some backlash from some parishioners, I guess, and then the provincial.
And what were you told?
Well, I was told maybe I need to look for maybe go to the diocese. That I needed to, in any case, for the time being, I guess I needed to think about it and then be very much in touch with my pastor as to what I'm preaching on, and just
It needs to get vetted
it needs to,
before you.
right,
You don't want to be able to preach on church teaching without it being double checked by
correct,
someone first.
correct.
So at some point, I think you were in Alaska. You do finally get to Miami. It's quite a difference from Alaska, isn't it?
Yes.
And fascinatingly, you told me for Lent, you were going to say the Latin Mass every day. And I was puzzled at first, but then you explained it to me that in order for you to do this, you'd have to wake up early every day, say that Mass in secret, and then say your regular Novus Ordo Mass. So the penance is you have to wake up early every day, not the penance of, it's not a penance to say the Mass,
Right.
it's a penance to do this. And what you said was, as Lent wore on, and you were living this double life, if I might
Right.
say, that there was not a better opportunity for you to see the double theology or the double churches, that there were two different things going on here. And you mentioned the Feast of St. Nicholas.
Yes. I mean, aside from all the genuflections that were different from one to the other, this constant comparison every day, aside from everything that was so different in the two, uh, the prayers, for instance, the feast day of St. Nicholas, in the traditional Latin Mass, early in the morning, the prayer would say something like, by his merits and prayers, may we be delivered from the flames of hell. That's St. Nicholas, traditional Latin Mass. And then in a couple of hours, I'm celebrating the Novus Ordo Mass. The Novus Ordo Mass is saying, uh, may by his prayers, may he protect us, and may the uh, path to our salvation be open.
Right? Maybe be accompanied on some paths.
Correct. And it was, yeah,
And obviously, this is sometime after Lent, right? So St. Nicholas is in December, but this is just an example of what you were seeing when you would say one Mass in the morning and then one Mass early in the morning and then the new Mass later. And these contradictions were now becoming manifest to you.
yes. And even my own contradictions. Because I'd be with all my kind of whatever I could say to get people to receive on the tongue, and then they'd put out their hands to receive Holy Communion, and I'd give it to them. And so this must have been terribly confusing for them. And so it was yeah,
And I think, I mean, speaking as a former Novus Ordo myself, I think traditionalists might take me out to the woodshed for this, but it doesn't occur to you in the Novus Ordo that this is wrong until it's pointed out to you. That I always believed that it was the body of our Lord, even though it was just bread, because it was Novus Ordo clerics. They didn't have valid orders. It wasn't a valid Mass. But so I wasn't committing any great crime, but I was told that it was okay, and this was how it was modeled for me. And so I just thought, okay, I'm allowed to do this, but I didn't not believe it was the body of Christ. I really did. So
right.
for those Novus Ordos, I think it was hard to break through until you're really explained, where this relates to. This is what Protestants did. This is a big break. So just speaking, as a retired Novus Ordo myself, that I understand that contradiction, and that has to be part of that transformation of, okay, this is not Catholicism. This is just an ape of Catholicism. Now, in 2018, this is your Lenten penance, but in 2019, you meet with an SSPX priest. What was the occasion for that?
Well, one of my spiritual directees had been going to SSPX masses. I tended to attract the traditional people to come to me for spiritual direction. And so this one directee, she said to me, "Hey, I'm taking my RCIA class at your parish, but I'm not sure. The priest is saying some things I'm not sure about." And so, and she said, "You should call Father so-and-so SSPX priest and talk to him." So I did. And I started asking him questions about confirmation. I started asking him questions about a lot of things, and he taught me a lot.
So how long does this go on for?
Well, it was for the end of his time as a priest in Miami, and then through the next priest, they assigned him to me, I guess, to
Okay.
come. And so it was probably over the course of a couple of years.
All right. So you are, shall we say, learning from the SSPX.
Yes.
And what did this consist of? Was it question and answer? Were you taking some kind of formalized classes with them?
He'd come and he'd sit in our lobby at 3 p.m. on Saturday, and then he'd come in, and then I'd invite him in my
I
office.
mean, did you have to look around for the cameras? I mean, would your superiors have approved of this? I mean,
I don't think so.
okay, so somehow no one catches that you are having conversations
No.
with the horrible
I don't think so.
Latin mass saying priest.
Yeah. And I had questions. I had some questions ready to ask him, and he'd answer them. He took all the time that I needed.
Okay, so this is 2019, 2020,
Something.
2021. Okay, and then does that progress any further? Are you thinking maybe I should join the SSPX or?
No, they invited me. They said, "Come up and visit us sometime in Sanford." And so when I would go visit my mom, who lived in Central Florida, I would go visit. I would go visit them, and I would then talk with their superior, ask questions. They always treated me very nicely, very very well. I mean, it was very. I mean, I was very impressed with them.
And where did you think this was going to go? Did you think at some point I'm going to have to say the Latin mass all the time, or?
You know, at this point, I think my main goal is I just wanted to know the truth on things. I wasn't thinking at the time of I need to change my vocation. I mean, I had at one point brought up to a superior, to a provincial, that, I wasn't sure about taking final vows as a Jesuit. And he said, "Well, I need to be looking around." But I just really wanted to know the truth about things. And so when I would go visit them, I would ask them questions just so I could know what the landscape was, what's going on there, why are things so different now, what happened at Vatican II, I mean, it was a truth journey.
So what happens after this period of time where you're talking to the SSPX? Because this is 2019. The letter that you wrote to your provincial is in April of 2022. So what happens in this interval?
Well, during this time, I began to, in just doing research on the internet and finding out about this thing called sedevacantism, I knew there was a Bishop Sanborn, and I knew Bishop Sanborn had been part of the SSPX at one time. And I knew that he had been kicked out of the SSPX. So I wondered what went on there. I want to know what's the problem? I mean, I like these SSPX guys are good, but what did he do? So
A bit of a detective story for you. You want to
it was
find out.
And Brooksville was not far from Sanford, because Florida's so narrow, so I could get there in the course of my visit with my mom. So I made some appointments with Bishop Sanborn, and Father Disposito was there also. And I asked questions, and they received me very well. I think they must have wondered who I was, what I was doing, what's this Jesuit doing?
Right.
And I think my I'm sure my Jesuit superiors would have not liked what I was doing.
Which is strange. I have a Jesuit background insofar as my undergraduate was at a Jesuit university. I got my master's at Jesuit university. I have a great love for St. Ignatius and the exercises. And it is at the heart of the Ignatian spirituality, or the Jesuit spirit, to ask questions, to dig deeper, magis, right? To go further,
right.
to go deeper.
Right.
And so you're just, in a sense, being Jesuit and inquiring further. And what was the gap did the gap start to open up between the conversations you were having with the SSPX and the conversation you had with Bishop Sanborn and the research on sedevacantism? Did you start to form something coherent that you could attach yourself to?
Well, I guess so. I was asking Bishop Sanborn questions and Father Disposito also, and they seemed to give me some complete answers, and they always showed themselves as willing in my conversations with Bishop Sanborn also. They showed themselves willing to let me ask the questions I want. And I had a sense there was a real a negativity towards sedevacantism from the SSPX, and that always
So if
made
you would ask them about sedevacantism, they would say this is
yeah, I mean, it was
real
kinda like
problematic.
like, it's a no-brainer that the Pope is the Pope, type of thing. And sort of that other position, the being kicked out, I don't know why that attracted me, because I don't think I'm just a rebel at heart, but I thought, I've been, I've been threatened to be kicked out also, and
So you wanted to dig a little bit
I
more into
wanna
that.
I don't always take the negative view towards the one that's being kicked out.
So what happens from these conversations with Bishop Sanborn, as they say, getting us to your letter, which we're going to get to in a moment, which is kaleidoscopic in what it covers, but this is take us through that final year, 2021, 2022. What are you figuring out that gets you to writing this letter?
Well, 'cause at this point, I had no idea I was gonna be dismissed, and that was gonna be a process, that there would be a long process of this. And so a very kind, family, a husband and wife that were traditional Latin Mass, uh, they were a couple, that attended the traditional Latin Mass, they said they would be willing to take me in. And so I lived with them for 3 months, and then
So what occasioned the dismissal?
what occasioned it there were 3 things. There was a series of questions I was supposed to answer called Conversations That Matter, and it was, kind of this battery of questions to help us as priests, and this sort of thing is done all over the country, to help priests be better and safer, uh, around the issue of minors. That whole issue, all that stuff that come up and
Sure.
okay, this battery of questions was to help us be in safety and to help them be in safety most of all.
Okay.
And so I did this for many years, and just like every other Jesuit. This particular year, this battery of questions had another element to it, and it was an element called cultural maturity. And this cultural maturity idea was that if we're more culturally mature, then we will be safer for children.
Okay.
Well, cultural maturity, that's a big red flag for me because our culture is anything but mature. Okay. And so I did some digging on that, and I found that the founder of the one who coined the term cultural maturity himself supported the evolution of gender
Mm.
and etc. And so that sent up big red flags for me.
Gender maturity, I suppose.
Gender maturity, and saying that dogmas,
But you weren't going to sign off on this,
no, I had always every year very docilely done it the thing, but this year
despite too much prayer, you were able to
that I
to be docile.
exactly, I
So
couldn't
this was point number one.
this was point number 1. I'd also told a assistant of the provincial that I was not on board with Vatican II, and I also, I don't remember what the 3rd thing was, but it was the Conversations That Matter, the Vatican II thing, and the not believing that the Pope is the Pope. Those were the 3 things that after having written my letter, those were the 3 things that were the problem.
Okay. And then you stayed with this family.
And I stayed with his family, and then after staying with the family, they introduced me to the pastor of their parish, and he allowed me to stay in his parish I was there for 9 months.
And you were saying mass privately or
Yes, I would say mass, in his chapel. Mhm.
so then you're able to finally write this letter?
And during that year, this is when I wrote the letter.
Okay. And I don't know if we're going to be able to make it public at some point, but I found it fascinating. You really went deep into a lot of issues. So this wasn't, oh, I like the Latin Mass and I don't like
No.
Francis. You went right to the heart of what we always talk about,
Yes.
which is Vatican II.
Yes.
So you were looking at Extra Ecclesiam Nulla Salus. You were talking about religious liberty. You talked about Pachamama. I did smile when I saw you refer to our brother Jesuit Francis in a document
Yes.
several times.
Yes.
Um, and that one of the occasions for some of this thinking was a 12 or 13-year-old who had come to you and said, can I go to the Episcopal Church with my stepdad? And he said, I had three different answers I could give, and one, which Vatican II might give, which is really doesn't matter. And he said, this is excellent news for a 12 to 13-year-old, right? It really doesn't matter. But uh, the the letter, I think, indicates what's at the heart of all this is not some sentimental attachment to the Latin Mass that, you wish that there was a lot of incense and you really like Gregorian chant, that you recognize that there was a different religion here and that you wanted to hold on to the Catholic faith, not to this other religion.
Correct.
Where does this take you in terms of asking yourself about your priesthood?
Well, in the process of all this, I had read some articles written by Father Anthony Cicada, and he makes a very good case for the non-validity of Episcopal consecrations, which meant that my priesthood would not be a valid priesthood. Something that most people don't want to face.
It's a pretty horrifying prospect, no?
Yes. But one thing that helped it a little bit better was that I was in the same boat because I was going to confessions. Very often it was priests that were ordained by Novus Ordo bishops that would hear my confession. So I was in the same boat.
So you wanted valid confessions yourself.
I wanted valid confessions myself, and I wanted to stop. I wanted to correct things.
So what was the breaking point? What led you to stop celebrating Mass?
The Novus Ordo Mass?
Well, no, the traditional Mass also, and make you say, all right, I'm not a priest, therefore I can't celebrate Mass.
Well, I celebrated the Latin Mass as the last time, the day I came to Brooksville. And I knew I needed to make the break. I knew I still needed to grow in my understanding of what my priesthood was or what my priesthood wasn't. I needed to grow in that, but I was willing. I wanted to do it.
And so that the break for you was entering the seminary.
Yes.
And up until that time, it was hard for you to let go
Oh, yes. And even if I knew something wasn't right,
intellectually.
I could figure it out. Somehow I wanted some part of me wanted to run the distance as a Jesuit priest.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to do it to the finish line.
But you restarted a new life. And what has been the big change for you in seminary life and studies? I think you can give a good reflection, having gone through 12 years of Jesuit formation. What was that like in comparison to, I guess, 2 years now of traditional seminary life?
A year and a half.
Just about. Heading towards 2 years. What can you give us some contrast for people who've never experienced Jesuit life or traditional seminary life? What are the big changes for you? Other than obviously not being called father anymore, not celebrating Mass, not hearing confessions.
Yeah. I would say there's a lot of content differences. My seminary training as a Jesuit, it was very modernistic. It was very modernistic, and so I can remember taking a class in philosophy, and one of the classes I took was in modern philosophy, and so I remember we learned about Descartes, we learned about Kant, we learned all these philosophers, kind of, and I had already learned about Aristotle and Plato. I'd learned, but I didn't know, there was no indication that one was right or one wasn't the right one. It's just kind of all these
It's just a
philosophers.
menu.
It's just a menu, and then our final exam was to choose any one of the philosophers and talk about how they understand human nature, reality, the philosophy of God, how they understand it. And so I chose St. Thomas Aquinas only because one of the other philosophy students said he's consistent throughout. And I thought that could only be a good thing because there's just a
You
lot
picked
of,
St. Thomas because it would be easier.
Yeah.
And so we were talking the other day that you mentioned you're this semester you're taking modern eras with Father Desposito, and you're reflecting all these errors that I'm learning. You were taught all of these things.
Yes, I knew them. I know them inside and out.
And what about your fellow seminarians? What about you could say that the overall formation? Because obviously studies are a big part of the seminary, and we can't diminish that. But there's, as you know, so much more to seminary life. Can you reflect on how that was different from your Jesuit formation?
Well, I mean, my Jesuit formation, we had the Regency period, so that was a very busy and active time with lots of people teaching, in my years of teaching and working in a hospital also. My years in the scholasticate and the theologate, they were also very active years, of learning, study. There was some ministry involved in these. Um, my training here is much more, it's a much more quiet training. It seems like prayer and just our general purpose for doing what we're doing is much more pronounced to me. My kind of, goal was to get through philosophy studies, to get through theology studies, to get through Regency. That was my goal, and so I did well, and I did what I was asked to do, but it could, the God element could be missing, and to sing the whole purpose of the whole thing, and why am I studying to be a priest? I don't think I had a real good handle on what the priesthood was. And in fact, in Berkeley, where I did my theology studies, I remember when we were ordained to the diaconate, there would be women outside that were protesting against the priesthood. And there were, I mean, it was very, I mean, they played down the priesthood, and we were supposed to, we couldn't be too clerical about this, too hierarchical. We had to be open to different ideas of priesthood, and I could never really put all of that together. So, but I went through the process, but there's a much clearer understanding of what the priesthood is and what it's supposed to accomplish.
Well, and I suppose as you're alluding to with that quiet, there's an opportunity to be alone with our Lord and answer those difficult questions. Why am I here? Why do I want to be a priest? What is the pull of my vocation? All of these questions, they're better answered in prayer. They're not, and I suppose what you're alluding to is that the ministry, the active life, could have distracted those other Jesuits and
Oh, yes.
yourself from really asking those hard questions.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It was good pastoral experiences that I had everywhere I went. It was all very good in that way. However, to sit down and ask the questions and to even dispute and to think that there could be other answers to the questions other than what I had been taught, it was a very scary thing and something non-existent in a way. Um, I guess the pro-life ministry, that was a door opening for me to ask questions
Mm.
because I knew abortion was horrible.
And that, yeah, as we alluded to earlier, you were even fought on this issue. That it's interesting. Your path started with pro-life, which is
Mhm.
as I've interviewed former Novus Ordo clerics who've entered the traditional Catholic life, that this is the first time I've heard of that as a particular vector. But it strikes me as totally logical that this is something that needs to be downplayed because it's the teaching of the church in action in the
Mhm.
real world. Okay, well, if I believe that this is a sin, then I have to do everything I can to stop it, and it's manifesting itself in this way. But the fact that you were even resisted on that is a real shocker. So, as I said, maybe sometime we'll be able to do a director's cut, a longer edition, but I think now people can be satisfied that they know a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your story, and shall I say, the story is not finished. You're still
Yeah.
you're here at seminary, and you're not discouraged by the fact that you were a Jesuit for 30 years, and you're now how old?
I'm 60 years old now,
And a second-year seminarian,
a second-year seminarian.
and that's not discouraging to you.
No. No, but I have to tell you, C.S. Lewis, he said something which really rings true with me. He said that progress what is progress? It's to know what your goal is and to go toward it, to get to it. He says, though, that if you find you're on the wrong road, you have to make a U-turn because if you keep going on that wrong road, you're not making progress. So you have to make the U-turn, come back and get on the right road. And the man that does that sooner is the man that's more progressive. So whatever age I am, if I'm on the right road, then whatever age God may take me tomorrow, he may take me in 30 or 40 years. I don't know.
Right.
But at least I'll be on the right road.
And is a 30-year U-turn at least to the beginning of that Jesuit life and even further back to being raised Novus Ordo as I was.
Yes. Yes.
So I hope our watchers, our listeners will keep you in their prayers, particularly as they do all our seminarians here, that you may persevere in what God has called you and he may perfect that call in you to potentially the priesthood. Thanks for taking the time to share your story with us.
Thank you very much, Stephen.